I don't know what just happened.
All right.
I don't know if the word
There we are.
All right, we're live.
Welcome
with
back.
Since you only had 2 hours of sleep last night, let me go ahead and do the intro for today. Welcome.
You do that.
To the Way Forward broadcast. For those of you that have been watching us and for those of you that have been making comments, that is so fantastic to hear that the effects of what it is that we've been doing, the reverberations have been going all over the world, and that you guys have been deeply encouraged by what it is that you've heard. And so Jason and I are back again today. The pastor from Illinois, the singer from Nashville. There may be some other distinctions about us, but we'll get into that on the show. We're going to be discussing the book White Fragility on this broadcast. And
my copy right here. There it is.
All right. Well, mine's on Kindle. Mine's on Kindle, along with all the other books that are on there. But let's since we've got some people that are going to be viewing, and then some people that I'm in a white fragility discussion group with, who may be watching this a little bit later. I want to say hello to you guys, high school, and so it's just great to always be a part, continue what we had begun before, and continuing to see some things. Hopefully, that will be able to be a positive change. We got to deal with the book White Fragility, but before we do, let's get into a little week. Jason, you hadn't slept very, and I'm very hot. What's going on?
I have no idea. I went to bed tired, and I woke up tired. So I was like, something happened one night. So I don't know what the thing is. I don't know if it was something I ate. We had a great time. We had dinner with some friends last night. It was really cool, and I don't know. I couldn't pull it together. So I'm going on about 2 hours of sleep. But I will say it was nice and cool in my room. So it wasn't that we didn't have right atmosphere. We were there.
Well, Jason's alluding to the fact that I was telling him that our house has been without air conditioning for the last 2 days.
In Nashville,
we are in Nashville, Tennessee. We're still in the Western Hemisphere, and so we have been experiencing a lot of warm weather. In fact, anytime we ask the kids, do they want to go anywhere in the car, the immediate answer is yes, because we get a chance to run the AC for a few minutes.
That's right.
And get some relief there. And you know it's bad when you wake up in your bed and then you go outside and you're like, man, I should have camped outside.
We couldn't go in our car because our AC really doesn't work very well in our car. So the kids don't want any part of our van. It makes this growling noise at us, and then it kind of putters out cold air. But weighing with comfort of cold air or paying out the money, my significant other goes for suck it up and deal. So
okay.
So we suck it up and deal.
Obviously, my wife has been just a trooper during this whole. We're about to go out of town, but we have just endured together. We've actually had some people that have been coming and staying over with us. God bless them as well. But we've just all been enduring. We've got about 6 different fans set up all over the house. Yeah. I think we got it down to about 85 yesterday. It was up in about 89.
Yeah,
so
that's hot.
It's a bit warm today, but you know what? These are all first world problems, and we're sitting here talking about our privilege.
That's right.
Of some certain sorts.
That's right.
I had a buddy who told me, there's not a lot of things that will cause me to jump into my privilege faster than going without AC.
Yeah. I used to never think that way until I lived in Texas. And I realized that God made an oven down there. I'm like, I don't care if it's dry heat or wet heat. Heat is heat. And so that's Teresa Duran. I haven't seen her in forever. Girl, how you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, why did Teresa tell you hello and she knows me just as much as she knows you?
White privilege.
I guess so. Here it is.
Privilege.
You already started out the show. The first salvo
White
has
privilege.
been fired.
Oh, she used to work with me in school, man. She was my right-hand gal, I guess. I couldn't have done it without her, so she was cool. It was good.
I guess she was kind of like your aide.
Yes, yeah. She was all of it. Yep.
But then we worked together also in school, in the Ferris Independent School District, and I guess I don't get any acknowledgement this morning. Okay. Guess you didn't enjoy that.
That's right.
Oh, wait. We have not because we ask not.
That's right. That's good.
Fantastic. All right. So how do you want to do this today? You're the man who usually puts together a ton of notes, quotes, and you sent me a ton of information this week.
Yeah. I think I found it helpful to understand where Robin Diangelo is coming from. I think if you just enter her world without understanding what she was academically raised in, and I probably even socially raised in to some degree, you might come at her a lot harder than you necessarily need to, or at least understand where she's coming from, because I think that she's insightful in her book in some areas, but I just think her conclusions and her worldview is all wrong. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I think trying to understand her framework is really helpful because it explains why she uses the term white fragility, which is so divisive. And she's trying to connect it to white privilege. So I thought, as I got into the book, she made no bones about it in her author's note that her book is deeply rooted in identity politics. I mean, she just is very clear. She wants you to know that. And when she uses that term, it tells you what framework she's working from. Because if you understand where identity politics comes from, then you understand why she's using the language and what strategy she's trying to use to convince you of white fragility. And so I thought it was helpful just to try to understand. So I think it might be, if you belabor me just a moment to try to work out a framework so we understand where she's coming from. I don't want to do her injustice to what she's trying to say and just, pick her apart without giving her an adequate understanding of where she's from. But so I think that's important.
Can I call timeout?
Yeah.
For just a second.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to deal with people who are jumping up and doing comments? Because we haven't been very good to the people in the comment section. Sometimes they'll have stuff that they want to say.
Yeah.
And again, for anybody who has comments, let me just go ahead and say that there's about a 10-second delay between what it is that you hear and then where it is that we're at in the actual conversation because of the way the streaming works. So give us as much description as you possibly can so that if we need to go back and refer to something that was said, we can refer to that specifically. Because I got a comment from my man up in Chicago, DJ Rock On, who said, "Stop it, man." Well, "Stop it, man" is great, but is it "Stop it, man" to Erskine, or "Stop it, man" to Jason, or "Stop it, man" this whole conversation, or we just need a little bit more description? And so hang with us for just a second, and then I'll let Jason have the floor, and you continue the direction that you were going, because you're going to lay some helpful foundation for us, I believe.
Yeah. And I think if you put it on the screen, I'll know, hey, let's stop for a second and address that. I don't have any control over that part. So you just put it on the screen and I'm happy to talk about it.
Sure, I'll engineer.
All right. So you cool with me giving a little bit of a setup then? You all right with that?
Yep. Give us some foundation.
Okay. All right, some foundation. So when Diangelo drops a term like identity politics, and she drops more terms as you go throughout the book, like coded language and some different things like that, she's operating from a worldview that is what is called cultural Marxism. Now, if you try to Google cultural Marxism, there's a critique that says this is a white supremacy definition of things, or this is an alt-right thing. But as you dig a little deeper, you realize this is an actual recognized philosophy of thought that you may not like the thought, but it's recognized as a thought. And so she's operating from that base point. And essentially what cultural Marxism is it's rooted in critical theory. And it's taken classical Marxism, which pretty much says there's a class warfare between the haves and the have-nots, and is now transferred it into this kind of cultural idea between the oppressor and the oppressed. And this comes from the Frankfurt School in the interwar period. And essentially what happens is this group of social scientists were really critical of capitalism and also critical of Soviet socialism. And they recognized that Marx was not very good at understanding culture. He's good at economics. He's good at understanding classes, but he didn't understand that culture is changed by certain institutions and different things like that. And so they come up with critical theory, which is this very broad idea of social change. And part of that is critical race theory that we're kind of familiar with. And so this really caught on in the 1960s with your more leftist theory people. Derrida is probably one of the most recognized French philosophers who came up with the idea of deconstructionism, which is an offshoot or inside the same veins as cultural Marxism. And essentially what deconstructionism is just pretty much take all of your traditional values and pick them apart and then re-put them into this philosophy that again fits with the oppressor-oppressed mentality of cultural Marxism. And so who's the oppressor? Well, as you get through the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, you realize that the oppressor is essentially male, heterosexual, white, cisgendered, able-bodied, natural-born men. That is the hegemonic oppressor. That's the one that pushes everybody down. Everybody who's not
the man.
Yeah, that's the man. That's exactly who it is. That's the man. And everybody who's not that fits in some class of minority. Okay. And in the 1990s, intersectionalism come out and said, well, there's different degrees of these oppressed people. So if the white male, Christian, able-bodied, cisgendered guy, if you're this is the oppressor, then you have people who are closer to him than and further. So Erskine, for instance, you're a male African American or American Black, cisgendered, heterosexual Christian.
I've confused all the terms now. You don't even know what to call me.
Since you're closer to here, you're not as far out. And then I'm generalizing the idea just for time, but essentially that's how intersectionality works. Had you been a African American transsexual, person and disabled and whatnot, your intersectionality would be back here and you're more oppressed. That school of thought, that whole thing is where Diangelo sits inside of identity politics, because she recognizes that this is the hegemony, the man is the hegemony, and society is broken up into these groups. And that's what she means by identity politics, is each group has their identity and each group is fighting against the man. Okay.
So let me just jump in at this point and just say that it's important to recognize that and to give that foundation, because she identifies herself as that as she is writing this book, to give readers a clue as to where she is going to go in the book. So when she arrives at some of those conclusions throughout the book, it shouldn't surprise you, nor, as Jason is saying, should you take a harsh stance toward her, because she said, essentially, this is what I'm going to say in this book, and this is the verification in the way that I substantiate my claim for who it is that I am. And so you find that all throughout the book, and there's some issues that we're going to bring up, some things that we like, some things that we didn't like about this book. But I think that important foundation is helpful for those that are out there saying, well, maybe you're being a little bit too critical about this point, or maybe you're emphasizing or seizing on something that she's saying that she isn't actually saying. And that's fair enough. I mean, you can read the book, you should read the book and come to those conclusions yourself. But we're going to do our best to maybe talk through some of the issues that are related to that. Again, what I would like to do, if we could, Jason, is if we could take next week and I see us maybe doing 3 or 4 more broadcasts on the way forward to help people out in this first season. And if we could do a whole show on cultural Marxism, that was a
Mhm.
good brief survey, but I think people would appreciate or come to appreciate understanding the foundation of how cultural Marxism is latent within our culture today,
Yeah.
and how and why we're responding the way that we're responding about certain things, and what puts us
Right.
in the context of that cultural conversation, what takes us out of that cultural conversation, some things that we can agree upon, some things that we definitely can't agree upon. And so it'll just help give us a foundation and give other people a foundation for where we sit in our cultural situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that'd be great because once you understand that framework, it's really interesting. I completely understand why she arrived where she arrived at the very end of the book. It made
Mm-hmm.
perfect sense, and probably why I push back against the term white privilege or white fragility the way I do. And I've written some things as to why some of my problems with the book. To be fair, I don't know if you want to start off with where I can maybe agree with her on the book, or we can agree.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the issues. Maybe let's talk about some of the strong points of this book.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the first strong point is that she's at least willing to address a real injustice that is happening. I mean, there are problems inside of these communities, and she's willing to put herself out there um, and begin to address it. I also think, for the most part, she keeps a pretty tempered tone to what she's saying. She's recognizing she's not trying to call people immoral or crazy, and I think she's not trying to incite a racial war or something like that. She's recognizing she's talking to a group of people who aren't going to agree with her in the first reading, and she's trying to keep that tone. So I appreciate that about the book. The big thing I agree with her on is I don't believe in the concept of colorblindness. And actually, that's one part of the book where her and I could find a bridge where I could say I absolutely agree with her that there is no you can't say I'm colorblind. I don't see race. I don't see color. Just the mere fact that if I'm trying to describe a friend like my best friend Erskin, and they ask me who is he and how do I recognize him, I have to at some point say, well, he's a black guy who's got a bike top and good looking and athletic and can sing like no other. And these are descriptions I can make of who you are. The second reason why I don't believe in color blindness is because I think God loves the aesthetics of color. I don't think Christianity makes you less black or less white. I think it actually accentuates it. And so I don't think you get rid of your color, your race, or your ethnicity, maybe a biblical term. Um, I think actually it's part of the beauty of the gospel and the kingdom of God. So I agree with her that I don't think teaching your children or teaching the church or teaching culture that, hey, we don't see color, we're colorblind. It's the right move. I think it's a mistake.
And let me just jump in on that as well. I have heard it often said that, we don't see color, we just see people whom God loves. And
Yeah.
then we'll stop the conversation at that point and just say, hey, I love you. Well, that's fine. In fact, I hear that a lot at the different churches that I'm at and different groups that I'm around. But at the same time, I hear your heart. But what I'm wanting you to also recognize is that there are some things that are uniquely important about the ethnicity that God has given me that I want to
Yes.
accentuate,
Yeah.
and that are the reason why we add some contribution to what it is that's going on here is because of that positive ethnicity that the Lord has given.
Right.
Um, in other words, my blackness added to whatever group that it is, which is usually primarily a white group, adds some distinctive there that brings character and flavor to the group that they would not otherwise have had, other than
Right.
us all looking around and saying we're all the same person
Yeah.
because we're all in Christ. And so therefore there's none of these distinctions that should be acknowledged or maybe downplayed because we don't want to make it seem as though race is an actual construct or an issue that we need to
Right.
deal with.
And on that same
And so
note,
I was appreciative of that.
on that same note, I know this is going to go against culture, but even white people have something to add to the discussion. Whiteness
Yes.
is not a sin. Being white, I should maybe say, is not a sin, and being white is not a you shouldn't demonize white people, because one of the things inside the gospel is just white people fit inside the context with black people and Asian and Hispanic and all the others. Where we recognize the sin is when one ethnicity exalts itself over another, but that's not what being white should be about. You know what I'm saying? And that's a really hard thing for I think the culture and the church to grasp. And I think that's why they want to say this idea. We're all colorblind. We see one color, and I'm like, no, that's not true either. And so, anyways, I didn't interrupt your piece.
No, that's good. I think that, and one of the strong things that I took away from this book, and this is sort of my own interpretation of what I'm taking away. I know that next week we can see how this can run aground, but I think that most people struggle with having to understand some of the nuances of ethnicity and some of the importance of the discussion. Now, when we get into cultural Marxism and how that has negatively led in some trajectories and some approaches, then we can say that's one way that perhaps we wouldn't want ethnicity taught or a type of diversity that's taught. But I think in general, just reading this book and having the discussion with several groups, I think it's important for us to understand the diversity that God has created. And I think that's important for us to be able to see that that is a very positive thing, in the sense of and I don't want to get too technical at this point, but our anthropology in terms of a doctrine of man or philosophy of man,
Yeah.
understanding ourselves in relationship to God as God's special creation on day 6. And then within that special creation, God has put this unique features and characteristics that help us to fulfill the cultural mandate, for proclamation, and advance the kingdom of God. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important for us to know things about one another. And I would add, be conversant with the way that we talk about one another and talk to one another, and find vocabulary, because what often I find is in conversations like this, people struggle. We come to that point of, well, kind of like some of my relatives before we got married said, what do we call Erskine? Is he black? Is he? It was just from the era that they were, and these were some aged people. From the era that they were in, like there are so many terms that could be offensive, and there's so many ways to maybe address
Yeah.
this, or think about this, or is this good or bad, or how do we address? His name is Erskine. It's kind of what my father-in-law said, and
His name
that
is.
was a kind of way of quelling the discussion. But I think for a lot of people, they would talk more about it if they had the vocabulary, if they had the
Yeah.
knowledge of how to speak to one another, speak about one another in a way that's not offensive, in a way that they're not immediately going to get jumped on because they've said the wrong thing. And so
Right.
that's just what I would add.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I commend her for bringing light to that and trying to celebrate diversity. Uh, I think the way she's going about it is not well, because it's rooted in this Marxist ideology. It takes her to places that are just, I think, outlandish and crazy. So
Yeah. So there's a comment that she makes here on page. I just saw it here. Humility. As we're taught to have a racial viewpoint. I think this is page 21. Over and over, I emphasize the importance of white people having racial humility and not exempting ourselves from the unavoidable dynamics of racism. How do you, Jason, if I can point the question to you, deal with some of the aspects just on its face value of the book related to fragility, humility, and how you embrace and internalize this. Because I can read the book just like you can read the book, but I cannot read the book as a white person having been called fragile and then having been told several times that I need to be more humble to hear the arguments that are out there. How does this book land on you?
How does white fragility land on me?
White fragility,
I'll
and
tell
then
you
the
the truth.
idea that you're constantly being told in this book that you need to be humble because you're a racist, and if you're
Yeah,
a racist and you know it, then you can get help. But if you're a racist and you didn't know it, now you know that you're a racist. Now you know that you need the help, and that's over and over, just like waves pounding in this book, over and over again. And I'm
yeah,
like, I can read
it,
that, and I don't have a problem with it. But do you read this and think, wait a minute, hang on a second, hang on?
yeah. Well, that's that circular reasoning that just drives me nuts throughout the whole book. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. If I don't acknowledge I'm a racist, I'm a racist. And if I acknowledge I'm a racist, and so she puts you in this trap. This and somebody had a disagreement about the book, and they just said, "See, you prove her point." I'm like, no, no. So yeah, I would say it's frustrating to read. It's for read when you're put in a box that you can't escape from. When you can't really have a thought. I disagree with this because the logic is not clear, or I may disagree with this because the evidence isn't there. Or I may disagree that no. If you have any if you're departing from that narrative, you're off. You're not. You can't even be a part of the dialogue. And so that was frustrating. Now, as far as the humility side to it, is I kept reading. I think that's what I had to do. I had to say, look, if I'm going to give her due, I got to stay at the table and let her flesh this thing out. And I've got about 9 about this book.
Okay.
But part of the humility, and not saying I'm humble, I'm just saying part of the humility is you got to stay put in the book. You got to keep going. You got to keep reading it. That's page 21. You got
Yeah.
what?
You're going to get that over and over again. Your whiteness is
That's
definitely
right.
a problem.
Yeah. So
Well, there's a comment that's
that the
up on the screen.
majority
I don't know if you want to
culture,
address that. You guys are both in
yeah,
Illinois, different parts of
yeah.
Illinois, I would say. But
The majority culture has, yeah. And so let's look at Terrence. He says a lot of white people just don't know how to talk about race and the real history of this country. Um, hmm. I think I think yes and no with that, Terrence, because I think part of the problem is I was taught about racism. She makes a comment in her book that racism, you can go to high school and college and never hear about racism, which I think is absurd. We had social problems classes in high school that we were talking about racism. I went to a very liberal university, and I was a political science, public administration major. Racism was all part of that. I think part of the problem is that white people are told very quickly. Well, I think what Diangelo talks about is if we were to bring up disagreements, that you are shut down pretty quickly about things. Yes, there's real issues to talk about that need to be talked about, and yes, there are white people who don't take the initiative to learn about them. I got family like that they're just not going to hear another side of it. But I also know the other side of that is the moment we start talking race and the moment we say something that goes against the narrative, I mean, it's on like Kong. And the conversation gets crazy. As a matter of fact, Erskine, I would have to say, of all my African American friends, you might be the most Um,
Oh, you're having audio problems at just the wrong
patient.
time.
Uh, of all of my African American friends, I think you're the only one so far who is.
Okay, Jason is having some audio problems there.
Did you hear that?
I don't know. Fix your internet, man. You know we're doing the show. Pay your bills.
Pay my bills.
Okay.
Go down. Thumbs down.
Well,
Let me take
you
you
were
through the
saying
settings.
something about Erskine, and you were saying something about I'm not the angry black man that other people are, and so I guess it's going to be okay to have this conversation with Erskine.
Yeah. So you can't hear me at all right now?
I can hear you, but it's coming in and
All
out.
right.
So just move
Okay.
as close to the router as you possibly
Okay.
can. Speak slowly.
Okay.
You're using a lot of big words for the people. But I did want to acknowledge
Sorry.
something that Karen Cromer says, that she talks about the term colorblind doesn't mean color doesn't matter, but not to use color in how I see someone. Living in a military world, being exposed to other cultures, you learn to see individuals. And that's the good-hearted nature, good-hearted part of when I hear people say those kind of things. I don't immediately take offense at that, depending on who it is and what's being said. I don't usually take offense at pretty much anything because, well, I don't usually care that much. I care too much about the gospel to care too much about what it is that somebody is saying to distract me from the gospel, if that makes sense to you guys. Like, if somebody makes a comment like,
Right.
why are you black? Or why does your hair look like this? Or why, like, all the racist things that I've heard in the context of churches, like, I don't count that up as racism that I need to be concerned about sometimes. And I've literally had people tell me there are no black people around. And so I'm asking questions as though, like, this is, and I'm like, really? Like, you've never had a black person to talk to before. And so they just start saying the most outlandish things because they can, because I don't care about those things. I care about the gospel, and I care that you know Christ.
Right.
But I don't care
Right.
enough about any of those things. And I guess maybe that's what you're referring to, Jason. I just don't care. It'd be hard for you to get me to care about those things. You could get somebody from the KKK on here and be like, man, I hate ends. I don't like Erskine. His shirt doesn't match. I mean, any of those type of things like that. And you're just a hater. And we're going to
Yeah.
talk about all the different categories next week when we get to cultural Marxism, because I've got some things that I want to say, because there's at least 4, maybe 5 or 6 points that I want to just nail down and say, here's the reason why I have no home on either side of this. I can't roll with my white evangelical brothers who are
No.
willing to dismiss the issues and say, hey man, we don't really have a problem here. It's just black people being emotional. It's just black people, stepping out of the pocket. I can't roll with that. And neither can I roll with my cultural Marxist friends who are out there talking about all the different ways that we're going to change the society and all the different voices that we need to silence in order to do that. I'm not rolling with that. So thank you, Karen. Okay. Well, Jason has left the building. We will try to get him back on here in just a moment here. We'll get a stronger connection with him, but let me ball out a second here. We've got some comments that are being made, and we're talking about the book White Fragility. If you haven't read the book before, Robin Diangelo, who does a fantastic job of at least identifying some of the issues that are going on in our culture. If you are white and you're watching this broadcast, is that any of you guys are out there? I'm looking at some of the names. Looks like a very white audience. My question to you guys is it uncomfortable for you, because this is something she touches on in the book, is it uncomfortable for white people to be referred to in reference to their ethnicity? And notice I didn't use race there. I'm trying to get you guys more over to my way of thinking about things. So is it uncomfortable for white people to be referred to primarily with regards to their ethnicity? Because she says that is going to get a reaction from most white people who don't and are not taught to think in ethnic categories. And that's one of the first things that I want to deal with. My friend Mayoshi says, oh, wait. Obviously, I'm white, pasty white, self-referentially. Is that a problem? And I know there's about a 10-second delay here, but I'll just go ahead and say, Jason says that he's getting back in just a few moments, so we'll welcome him back when he comes. But for DeAngelis, that if you are sensitive about the fact that, no, I shouldn't be referred to as white, I should be referred to as, middle class or evangelical or all these other titles, you're going to get bombarded in this book over and over again with the subject of your whiteness. And like Jason was talking about, it does filter into this category of circular reasoning, because if you have a problem with being called white, and if you have a problem with white people automatically being considered to be racist, you're going to have a problem with this book, because those are the two premises that she puts in over and over again. And let's see how we can get Jason back in here. Let me send him an invite. Let me see if I can get on the wheels of steel here and invite this brother in the middle of the conversation. All right, so he's coming back. But before he does, I'm going to hijack this show and take it over. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of things there. I think that for a lot of American Black people, the subject of ethnicity is so front and center throughout all of your life that it's not uncomfortable. It just begins to be customary for you to be referred to in ethnic terms. I don't know what that situation is like for white people in our culture, Caucasian people in our culture, or anybody that falls under the category of whiteness in the way that DeAngelis represents it. So that might be an issue. One issue that I'll go ahead and bring up now, and hopefully Jason can get back here in just a few moments, but the subject of white fragility in terms of title. I didn't like the title of this book, and I thought, wow, I can write something and punch somebody in the face immediately with the title, and then I can guarantee that they're not going to read what it is that I have to say because I've already thrown the first punch. White fragility, to me, man, that's deep right there. And if you didn't know, Robin Diangelo is herself white, Caucasian, whatever designation that you choose to use today, whatever is most comfortable for you today. She is that. And in portions of the book, she's apologizing for her whiteness. Now, I got another problem with that. You are who God made you to be, a man, a woman, not any of that other funny stuff that's out there. So, yeah, going to get myself in trouble for that. But Jimmy crack corn, and I don't care. Essentially, DeAngelis apologizes for whiteness. She has a great concern about whiteness, and we'll talk about this next week in reference to the hegemony. But the word fragile, white people, you should know that you're fragile, and you can't handle these discussions about ethnicity. That's what DeAngelis is essentially saying at the title of this book, and I found a big issue with it. I had a problem with that. I would not like to see a book that is called Black Impotence and then whatever the subtitle is, because that would just be like, what the? Okay, this is a family show, so I won't go ahead and say what I was going to say. But does that bother you? I'm getting a lot of comments here. Yep. Yeah. So, John, you are absolutely right. Coming with the lion. So there are two discussions that are going on, two different discussions that have two impetus and two outcomes. And so what we want to do on the way forward here is we want to figure out how to blend, if we can, some type of third discussion or some type of contributive discussion that leads us to being able to have an important dialogue with those who are steeped in sociology, and for our brothers and sisters who are in Christ Jesus, to bring them into the discussion in such a way. If you're one of those people that just, I just read the Bible, I don't read anything else, then some of these terms that we're throwing out, like cultural Marxism, identity politics, white privilege, all these different things. You're going to read your Bible and you're going to say, well, the Bible doesn't address any of these things. Well, actually, the Bible does address all of those things through the cross of Christ, but you won't find the terminology that people are using today. And so what we hope to do on this broadcast is to present what hopefully is a cogent biblical worldview. We believe in the Trinity. We believe in I believe in God the Father, Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth. Jesus Christ is only begotten. I mean, the whole 9 yards. 1689 confession. I guess both of us would maybe tend more toward that. But we have identifiable markers of historic evangelical Christian faith as both of our common reference point. So from that, we have both felt like we are not engaging the culture in a way that we can understand, one, what they are saying, and two, that they can understand what we are saying. And there's a lot of lobbying of positions that are going back and forth, and people are missing the targets because we're not actually talking to one another. Obviously, for those that are listening to this broadcast, and I don't know why Jason hadn't come back yet. I invited him. What ways can we talk to the, and I'm going to just go ahead and say this, non-believer who is steeped in sociology because that's their point of reference in their worldview, an anthropology that is maybe anti-God or at least very pro-humanity, about the gospel in ways that will help them to grow in their understanding, and actual points of change can begin to take place in our culture. So, Jason, if you're watching this show, I would encourage you at this point to start making a bunch of comments. I don't know why you're not there. You should be there. But that is one of the things that I think is important for us to keep in mind. Yeah, two different outcomes. And like Jason said, he only got 2 hours of sleep last night. And so hopefully he didn't fall asleep. He laid down, folks, and then he just couldn't get back up. Okay. Interesting comment there. I guess that would be in the category of some speculative theology in terms of why God did things the way that he did things. All I know is I'm not in any position to tell God he did anything wrong. And so I don't think, Ed Neal, that the differences that we have ethnicity are a point to divide us. I think actually, if we're regenerate and our heart has been changed, the differences that we have in ethnicity actually will unite us and make the gospel more palatable to a very diverse world. That's my supposition, is that there are some things that from my privilege, I'm able to address in areas that I'm able to express, ways that I'm able to express things culturally, that resonate a different way than if someone who were Caucasian resonate those things. And conversely, vice versa. Now, when we team up together, it becomes an unstoppable dynamic duo or trio, or however many different ethnicities and complexities are put together within the context. We become unstoppable at that point because we come in from all these different vantage points. We got hip hop as a part of it. We got country as a part of it. We got, rural as a part of it. We got city as a part of it. We got, quick pace. We got slow pace. We got contemplative, reflective. We got apologetic. We got systematic. We got all these different ways of coming and approaching the same thing as presenting the glory of Christ in the way that it is. So I like the comment that Mayoshi makes this morning, that all creation screams diversity. Well, I didn't kick Jason off the show, but Jason, if you want to come back in the form of comments, I don't know if you're an outsider that's looking in on this, but I don't know how to get you back on the show, but we want you back on the show. But until then, and I'll deal with your question here in just a moment. But until then, I want to give some other helpful things that I thought about this book. And I didn't know if Jason felt the same way that I did, but I actually felt like, and I was telling my wife this, who's also a part of the study group that I'm in, that I thought that chapter 7 should have been the first chapter of this book. And if you're reading this, the chronology should go, in my humble opinion, and I actually did reach out to Robin Diangelo and her team, so to speak. I don't know if she ever got this herself personally, but that's how it is when you're famous. But I did invite her to come onto the show. I wanted her to be able to speak on behalf of her own book. And, it's one thing when you can talk about somebody based on your research and your understanding, but it's another thing when that person can talk about themselves. And so we did invite Robin Diangelo to come on the show. We did discuss some things with her. I didn't want her to think that I was being critical, but I think I did mention in her comments to her team that I thought that chapter 7 should have been the first chapter of the book. So if you're cherry picking this book, White Fragility, skip ahead to chapter 7, read that chapter. It should have gone 7, 6, 5, 1, 2, and then the end of the book, which I felt like she kind of trailed off and kind of got a little bit circular in her reasoning at the end of the book. But I felt like it was a strong chapter 7. She actually gives her definition of what white fragility is. And then it gives her experience with why she's dealing with the subject the way that she is. I felt like she should have started that way and given people an opportunity. Okay, if I can get past the title of this book, let me just come into your world just enough so that I can have the impetus to feel like I want to read the rest of this book. And so I felt like chapter 7 was the golden chapter of this book. That would be my gold star chapter of this book. And then chapter 6, and then chapter 5, and then 1, 2, and 3, and then the end of the book as it is recorded. So that's me personally. Obviously, Diangelo doesn't agree with that. Others in her editors didn't agree with that. But I feel like she gives the most cogent definition of white fragility in the book and the most humble definition of white fragility. At times, I believe the book struggled because it made some statements about the fact that black people, because we're part of the disenfranchised class in the way that she's using cultural Marxism, that won't allow black people to be viewed as racist themselves. We can be the victims of racism, but we cannot be racist ourselves because we don't have cultural hegemony on our side. Jason and I are obviously going to unpack that next week, but I wholeheartedly, let me get a little bit closer to the screen, people. I wholeheartedly reject the fact that black people can be racist. In fact, I've experienced and been privy to a lot of racism within the African American, black American community. And I want to make sure that we understand that racism is a sin and that we want to be clear about the fact that the only remedy for sin is the cross of Jesus Christ. And so I think that from the vantage point that Diangelo is writing with cultural Marxism and identity politics, she had to make that statement, but I think that statement is blatantly false and ridiculous. All right, so racism exists, and that was acknowledged clearly in there. There were some historical pointers in the book that I felt like are helpful. Have you guys heard about the Tulsa burnings, race riots in Tulsa? There's a book called The Burning that is out. I haven't read it yet, but a lot of people are reading that book and saying, hey, I didn't know that there were whole white communities that burned down the entire parts of cities in Tulsa, Oklahoma, affluent parts of cities, affluent black people in a particular city because of a race riot, misunderstanding. Are you guys familiar with Emmett Till? Because the Amy, what's her name, story that just came out this summer of the lady with the dog in the park. If you understand Emmett Till in that situation, and all the backlash of that story, it helps you to understand this story that's taking place this summer with the lady that was in the park with her dog who tried to call the police on the black guy who was just standing there, and like she was way frantic and really trying to weaponize the police and use his blackness against him because historically our country's had a problem with that. Yeah, Amy Cooper, thank you for that. That is an issue that has been brought up a few times in reference to history, but there's a couple of questions here. Come on. Yeah, so one of the things that Diangelo says in this book, and I wholeheartedly disagreed with this at the end of the book, was that if you want to learn about ethnicity, I'm using my term, don't ask black people to support their arguments or to talk about it themselves, because black people have had a history of trying to talk to white people about the issues that we're struggling with or the issues that we're facing, and white people saying, well, just suck it up. Asian people do it. Jewish people do it. Indian people do it. Quit your complaining and go back to work. So after years and years and years of black people being told your stories, your situations in life, they don't matter to us, just go back and just get to work, then you shouldn't ask black people, because it's almost as though, wow, DeAngelis does an incredible thing, and I would love for her to get on here and talk about this. But essentially what she's saying is there's such black fragility, that you shouldn't talk to black people about race, because black people are not going to do well in the conversation about race. And particularly, and almost mind-numbingly, she talks about white women crying as a really big source of frustration in the black community, because when white people cry, especially white women cry, something bad usually happens to black people. And I just kind of lost my mind at that point in the book. So the question that's being asked, do you think most black people want white people to talk to them about race? You've put me in this position of answering for all the black people. All the black people, can you give me a collective vote? Big Head is not here, by the way. Big Head, Ruby and Scooby are in the house, but they're covered up. Black people, can you give me a collective vote? Can we do a poll out there somewhere in Nashville, somewhere across this land? Do we want white people to talk to us about race? I'm going to go ahead and answer for the black people. Because that's what you do on your show. I'm going to say that black people absolutely need white people to talk to us about race. We need to talk to you. You need to talk to us. There needs to be an open exchange. There needs to be an open dialogue. I do not like, and I'm going to hammer down next week, but you should get me fired up now. This question, Karen, gets me fired up. You're going to get me fired up next week about this question. Wait a minute. I'll be in Texas next week. We may be able to have this conversation in person. Okay, so anyway, I'm so fired up about this question, because essentially what is happening here is there's a one-way conversation that is taking place because of cultural Marxism, because of a lot of things that are going on here. And DeAngelis points to it a lot in this book. Black people can talk to white people about race and ethnic issues. White people, you cannot talk to black people about ethnic issues, because you're part of the problem. And so here's what I understand. At the foot of the cross, there are some things in all of our lives that we are able to see and able to address. I love Vodi Bachum's message on cultural Marxism, because he essentially says we have to trust one another in our gospel relationships to be able to speak to one another and call out blind spots that we see, and to be able to highlight certain things that we see. I am so thankful that there have been a number of people who have called me and said, okay, I don't understand what's going on with the riots. I don't understand what's going on with the looting, changing of names, statues, all these different things. Help me understand from a perspective that I don't have how to see these things. And so we've had some really good conversations, and I've learned a lot about the different responses that are out there to rioting, protesting, burning down of statues, changing of names of things that are going on there. I've learned a lot about white culture by the comments that people have made. And I've given people the freedom and the space to be able to come to me, text me, and all the different ways that people have gotten in contact with me. Facebook Messenger, and they've hit me up and said, hey, man, I just don't understand this. We work very hard. We don't have a lot of money, but the money that we do have, we work hard. We don't complain. We just put our head down. We've had to do that time and time again. I don't understand why there's so many black people who are complaining, and it seems like they're just lazy and not willing to go out and work and to do different things. Can you just help me with that? And we ensued with a wonderful conversation, but it helped me to understand a mindset that is out there, so that when I'm addressing these subjects like I was at Iowa State, among other black peers, one of the things that I often say to them is, if you have the ability, and you do have the ability being a college student, to control some of the perception about your work ethic, then you should apply yourself, black community, to a work ethic that endears you to the public around you, to be able to move things forward and to change some of the perceptions. Now, are there still going to be people who have biases and perceptions against black people and black work ethic? And maybe some experience that substantiates the fact that all the black people that they've worked around have been lazy or not wanted jobs that could have advanced their family and their career. Absolutely. But at the same time, I'm able to partner that and couple that with a reality of an experience and the Black experience that maybe people don't have, or they don't know the living conditions that people have gone under, and the levels of systemic oppression. Could easily have used the word injustice, but systemic oppression that's out there that have kept people. Jason, you should get. Oh, he's back. I'm sorry. I'm waxing eloquent. This man is back. Sorry about this, people. Sorry,
Hey,
Jason.
it's been a good. I've been listening for about 10 minutes. That's cool. That's good.
I'm sorry about that, man. I didn't see you on there, so I thought Jason's not here.
I surrender
People
my
asking
white
questions that get me fired up.
I surrender my. I'm just doing what Diangelo told me to do. Shut up and don't say a word and just listen to what you got to say.
Okay, I talked a whole lot about some of the areas, and I've even gotten into some areas where I've disagreed with the book, and it's out there now. I read it. I enjoyed some parts of it. I couldn't tolerate other parts of it, and so now that's your intro. Go. I'll sit back.
You'll sit back. I
In the
will
heat.
like 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay, a few issues I have with the book. I think the rooted in identity politics and cultural Marxism is a bad play because it's going to lead her exactly where she winds up, which is all white people are inherently racist. And I'm teaching my kids to be racist. I'm teaching my 3-year-old who's named after the man sitting next to me to not appreciate him or like him. Essentially, that's Diangelo's conclusion. And I think that comes from a worldview that is looking to weaponize race. So that's one of the reasons I push back against white privilege and white fragility is I don't think the framework it's working in is the right way to go about it. Aside from the circular reasoning that's all throughout the book that traps you, it talks about that. I think some of her claims are outlandish and at best and wrong at worst. The whole Jackie Robinson thing, to assume that he was only good enough to play with because they were white, totally actually belittles his ability and his magnificence as a baseball player. You already touched on the white women crying thing. I thought that was it was crazy, and then of course the other idea that no one learns about racism until graduate school or afterwards. I thought that was nuts. I also thought there's a lot of contradiction. Did you pick up by chance? In chapter 1, she tells us that white people do not think in terms of race or know anything about really racial identity. But then in chapter 4, she says that we have white solidarity. That doesn't make any sense to me. And that
I wanted to ask you about white solidarity.
Yeah.
Because that was to some degree inconsistent, and maybe if Diangelo was here, if she would have accepted our request like I asked her,
right.
she would have actually got out of bed. It's kind of early over in Seattle where she's at in Washington, and maybe she's on vacation. I'll be fair to her. Maybe it is the summertime. Maybe she's on vacation wearing her mask somewhere on a beach. So you should have came on the show though. It was inconsistent, chapter 1 and chapter 4. We're
inconsistent. Yeah. And so that was a little weird. Also, the coded language thing, I just thought was that's right out of the political correctness playbook. So when you say bad neighborhood, it equals black neighborhood. Did you catch the example she gave about the friend who bought a house in New Orleans? And she said, but you have to own a gun to live there. And it was Diangelo who automatically assumed it was a black neighborhood right there on the forefront. And I thought that's kind of crazy that you assumed that. That you made the connection, not even your friend at first. And so there's this idea of coded language, which again goes back to controlling the dialogue, controlling the discourse, so that if you buy into her terms, you agree with her terms, and you come to her conclusions, even though the coded language is outlandish and even racist in itself. I think she overgeneralizes way too much, which is what she would accuse white people of doing. She, in fact, is herself doing. And she actually makes the statement that white people can only be white because of black people. Did you catch it at the very end of the book? I wrote it down verbatim.
I'm confusing that with the article that you sent me about white people being subhuman.
Well, yeah. Now,
Um,
now this one, I think it's chapter 12. Whites can only be white because of black. That's one of her. That's one of her operating points, and that we are
it's
socializing.
problematic.
It's a lot of problems there. Uh,
I guess you should
and
thank me more than than you do.
thanks, bro. Thanks for making me white. Um, and and then this
Keeping white
idea that
people
we're
white. Can we get
yeah,
a?
keeping
Can somebody
white.
take a picture of
That's
the
cool.
screen?
Keeping white
Keeping
people
white
white.
people white.
uh, and so this idea that I'm socializing my kid to not like to be racist against African Americans and you and your family, and I'm like, that's just crazy because I just thought that the whole idea of socialization, that's inherently what we're doing. And then there's really no solutions from chapter 9 on to how this goes. Essentially, white people just need to suffer. I mean, that's her solution. It's not about coming to a place where you and I can understand each other better. It's about suffering. It's about being tried, purified by fire, so to speak. Um, and the less white I become, the more black you can be. I just think that's off the charts. I don't think you need me to be black. I don't think that's the case.
Never did. Sorry, bro.
So so that's some of the issues. I mean, and just in so many minutes, I was writing it down, and of course, if I lay these out here, then of course she says, "Well, you're inherently racist, and those things don't matter," and so then of course the whole premise of the book falls apart at that point because I'm like, where do we go from here? And there is no go from here. Um, and
See,
so
here's what needs to
uh,
happen. I've talked to people like Diangelo's. In fact, the group that I talked to at Iowa State, that was the Black Student Union vice president that I talked to. I go on college campuses and I try to share with the Black Student Union. They won't ever bring me in to have any discussions like this because I believe it's the cultural Marxism that they understand that I am not a proponent of cultural Marxism. But I do recognize that there are problems, that there are issues that our world needs to deal with. I do recognize that loving God
right,
and loving your neighbor are two different things that should reside together, and that we need to have
right,
obvious gospel kingdom oriented solutions for these type of things. And yet I don't have a lot of black people that want me to advocate or speak on their behalf. And I think that I could be the president of the black people. If I can't be the president of the United States, let me be the president of the black people. John Lewis just passed away, and I do not make light of that. He was a civil rights
yeah,
stalwart who was there. Seeing the footage of him on the Edmund Pettus Bridge is forever etched in my mind, and hopefully throughout all of my contact and correspondence with my kids, it will be etched in my kids' minds so that they understand that freedom has been brought with a great price. Thank you, John Quincy Lewis, for your contribution. Hopefully you knew the Lord and may you rest in peace. I'll be the president of the black people because there are some times that I want to tell people, shut up and get to work. And that's what I told the students at Iowa State. And they started looking at me sideways, but after they listened to me for 45 minutes, they started saying, you know what, this guy's making a lot of sense. Where are the
yeah,
entrepreneurs? Where are the people who are working hard? And I'm not saying that there aren't situations and
right,
categories and circumstances
right,
that have alienated people and made people had people in a difficult position in our society and continue to be in a difficult position in our society. But hey, we've got to move some things forward, and we've got to have those who are forward thinking alongside of us, and then collaborating like we were talking about last week with other people who are forward thinking. And then all of a sudden you've got this natural diversity that takes place of people who are trying to
yeah,
advance the kingdom. They're trying to advance kingdom agendas. They're trying to get things done in this world. And the people who are pushing against that are more obviously seen. One of my big concerns about what's happening now in our society is you can't tell people who are social justice from anybody else in this culture and society now. I mean,
right,
somebody who is concerned about their neighbor and loves their neighbor is lumped in together in some people's mind with those who are wanting to tear down statues and those who are wanting to riot and those who are wanting to. I mean, we can't tell any of the differences and distinctions that we have in our society anymore because the lines have become so blurred out there because people are not giving a clear message, a clear warning, and clear direction. And I want to be president of the black people so I can tell us we are moving forward. We are not moving backwards. All those things that have happened in the past, they happen, and we need to make note of those things. I told somebody last week, hold on a second. Can I cook a little, just a little bit more? I told somebody last week, they said, hey, this statues thing, man, where are you at on the tearing down of statues? And I'm like, I wouldn't tear a single statue down. Leave all of those. Even that crazy Nathan Bedford Forrest statue that's up in between Franklin and Nashville. Crazy looking Nathan Bedford Forrest. KKK. My kids drive past that everything. They're like, hey, there's a Nathan Bedford Forrest statue. And they know who he is. They know what he did. And I think that alongside all of those statues that people have torn down, we should put up some other statues or monuments or plaques that talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this person so that we can actually learn something in our country. Instead of tearing things down, let's build things up. Let's build the education. Let's have people going to the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, looking at the statue and going, man, this guy did a lot of terrible things. Why is this statue here? And then learning as a result of that. But anyway, they won't let me be the president of the black people.
Well, it's because you don't fit the worldview that's being accepted right now. That's part of the cultural Marxist philosophy, is to segregate and to segment society in little groups. And if you don't fit inside that ideology, even though you are a black man, you don't hold the right worldview. So therefore, in many regards, you don't matter, and that you would kind of exempt yourself from this whole thing. Which is why I think this worldview is going to eventually destroy the nation and society more than it's going to help it. Which is where the church has got to step in and provide the better worldview, which is where evangelization takes place, which is where discipleship takes place, because we've got to counter this worldview with a better one that brings more prosperity and more organic diversity, which is what you were talking about. In the kingdom of God, when it is being advanced by making much of Jesus, diversity happens organically and beautifully, and we begin to accentuate the ethnicities versus try to belittle them and put them down. And I think that's what's killing me about this whole thing as I'm watching this unfold, is there are no real solutions. A lot of death is happening. A lot more death is going to happen as we tear this thing apart.
Speaking of statues, some of the statues that were put up to intimidate black people. Crow, bro, you putting little scarecrow stuff up, gonna scare me? Those statues are not coming off of that pedestal to do anything to me. I am not afraid of a statue. I don't think anybody else should be afraid of a statue. I think, and this is a good discussion that we could get into at some point, Jason. This is a sidebar discussion that I'd love to hear what you have to say. But the N word was used as a very derogatory word. Ooh, said some nasty things about people. Made in the image of God. Now, black people, when they use the N word, has a totally different connotation. Black people could say the N word, N word, N word, boom, 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 N word, N word, N word. And among black people, that's quite all right, because the word has been redefined to take something that originally was used as a point of intimidation and degradation, and then use that as a point of endearment and also accomplishment in some circles. So I understand some of those statues were put up to intimidate black people. I recognize that. But I'm just not going to be intimidated.
Miyashi Gardner makes the point that we need to remind them of the evil of our past. That reminds me of something I read about the Holocaust and how many of the Jews didn't want the camps torn down or some of the symbols torn down because they're afraid that we would forget the history and go back to it. And this cancel culture of tearing everything down and tearing careers down and tearing people down, that's part of the ideology. You cannot be reminded of that. You can't have it anywhere near. You're going to cleanse our history. There's a lot of sins in our flag. There's a lot of good blood on that flag, but there's a lot of sins in that flag, and you got to, part of being American is seeing it all and owning it all, the good, the bad, the ugly, and part of the kingdom of God. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. Sorry.
No, and just part of the kingdom of God is trying to redeem our society. That there's ultimately one blood that cleanses it all, and that's Christ.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to a comment that Terrence was making a little bit earlier about the real history of America, wherever that is, and whoever teaches that. That's why I'm a proponent of homeschool. I just want to throw that in there. Actually, everybody's a proponent of homeschool. Do you guys even get a chance to go back to public school? The coronavirus going on there?
They're doing a B schedule. Kids on with the last name A through L go Monday, Wednesday, and then the rest go Tuesday, Thursday, and then I think they have an off day Friday or something.
Okay. I thought everybody was a homeschooler now. I was like, it's a moot point. I don't have to advocate for homeschooling. Everybody's doing that.
Right. That's right.
But not everybody's homeschooling. But this is the reason why I advocate for homeschooling, is because if I feel like there are gaps in my education, instead of leaving it all to the school district or the school system to be able to provide that complete education and that complete history of what's happened in America, I am responsible as a parent. Kids don't know about history and what's happened in civil rights and what's happened in the struggle, then that's on me.
Yeah.
But they know about it because
well,
we'll be getting it in.
That's one of the reasons, this conversation we're having is caused me to have conversations with Ethan and Naomi and my kids about history and injustices and things like that. One of the things we settled on is in high school, my kids are going to read things like Mein Kampf, and they're going to read about the Gulag, and they're going to read about these things that public school has gotten rid of completely. You ain't going to touch that, but they need to understand how these ideologies have real consequences. Marxism killed 100 million people, and any form of it that flourishes in society is going to bring death. And our kids need to know that. And that's why we challenge it with the gospel, with the Christian worldview, is that we say we want a worldview that brings life. And we want a worldview that brings prosperity. Mein Kampf and cultural Marxism and classical Marxism, they bring nothing but death.
So this is a good comment from John, who is talking about the fact that, it's good to have a good Christian view, but a lot of people who are listening maybe will hear, are not going to be Christians, are not going to be influenced by that biblical worldview. This is kind of the reason why we've done the show. And so I wanted to put this comment on the screen because I think that it's important for people to recognize that though there be perhaps even fewer Christians than we even think that there are, this conversation, overheard by, or at least introduced into circles of those who are non-believers, can be a very evangelistic conversation as well. Yeah. Because I'm talking about the fact that although my concern for you is great and the suffering that you've experienced, I have a greater concern for you because the suffering that you've experienced, i.e. the racism, discrimination, degradation that you've experienced in our society, does not account to the same level of concern that I have for your eternity and your soul. Like, people discriminating against you is horrible, and that should not take place. But you spending eternity separated from Christ, if I can do something about that and speak to that issue, I want to be clear about the fact that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. And if I don't do that, then shame on me. Shame on me for doing all these broadcasts and all these shows and traveling and doing all these different things, and I've not expressed the greatest level of concern. And so, yes, the statues, the issues, Statue of Liberty, kneeling, bring up 500 different issues. Those are issues that actually have lives behind them, that have been oppressed, and they have been in some way discriminated against, in some way they've been marginalized, and all those different things, people who have been created in the image of God. But if we do not strike the bell and point those people to a savior in Jesus Christ, and you're going to die an accomplished Marxist, and what in the hell would that actually even do? Right. Nothing. Right. So thank you for that question, John.
Absolutely. And this, he brings up the point that most aren't Christian. And that, again, goes back to your indictment against the church with Black Lives Matter and cultural Marxism. The worldview replaced Christianity is this Marxist idea, and people are flocking to it. And they're flocking down the broad path straight to hell. And the church has to, the way forward, the only way forward through this whole thing is to get out of the church walls and into the homes of these folks so that they can bring the gospel to change the heart, to change the worldview. And if the church doesn't do that, there is no racial harmony, there is no justice, there's no anything, because this worldview is prevalent and it's going to take root in our young people, the Gen Zs and all these crazy white kids who are between the ages of 15 and 22 who are going out and acting crazy, like absolutely off the wall crazy, with things, and there's nothing to temper them, nothing to tame them, no logic, no reason. We're just going to come against everything and everybody because we have bought hook, line, and sinker into this Marxist ideology, and only the gospel can change that. Only the gospel.
Amen. I don't know if I'm just getting fired up over here, if it's just so hot. I'm just sweating over here. I don't know what the temperature is. It's got to be like 87, 88 degrees in here. So I know that we've gone a little bit longer today because you were not part of the broadcast. Are there any concluding comments that you want to make? Because I got to go get an air conditioner somewhere.
Right. Ed Neal, you would be no different than Candace or Ben, empty windbags.
If we didn't talk about the gospel.
If we didn't talk about the gospel. That's good. Actually, I agree with that. Absolutely. I wish Candace was a believer. I like hearing her argue. I like hearing her talk. I love some of the ideas and solutions she's coming up with for Black communities. She's articulate. She's bright, but no gospel. no gospel. No God. I wish she was there.
Candace, can you come on this show? Anyone who knows Candace Owen, if we can get in contact with her. I said some pointed things to you earlier, but I also said some nice things to you. So take that into consideration. We're not your enemy. We're your friend. Ben Shapiro, bro, I don't even know what you're talking about, bro. You get hyped up and you just go, bro. You're welcome on the show too. Ben, if you'd like to come on the show and talk fast and give us some statistics, we can listen to that and then we'll respond appropriately. We'll love you too, brother. Yeah. And then anybody else out there, Jay Seculo has mentioned up here. Jay Seculo, if you want to come on the show, we'll make space for you guys. We're not all exclusive like that. We're trying to be inclusive in the best way possible here.
That's one of the things I'd like to see in this show as it progresses, is to begin to talk to more people out in the place and just start having some real conversations with those folks. What's the word on the street? You know, that kind of thing. What's the word on the street? What's going on? I live in a county that's primarily Trump supporting, and there's a lot of misconceptions about Trump supporters. I know some beautiful people who are just really neat, sweet, generous, godly, trying to find the way forward with racial harmony, who support President Trump, and they'd be mischaracterized as a bigot or something like that, which is just not true. I'd love to talk to them. Just like I'd love to talk to somebody. Yeah, I'd love to talk to, as we made a distinction between the Black Lives Matter movement versus the organization, the global network. I would love to talk more with the movement folks and find out, hey, what's going down, and have that conversation. So maybe, God willing, we could do that at some point.
And I would say that I'm characterized in a neighborhood in East Nashville that I would be surprised if you could find very many Trump supporters at all. Yeah. I mean, people drive the Subaru, which is a flag symbol of liberal ideology. I don't know how that became the case, but people drive the Subarus and, they support the Elizabeth Warrens of the world and the Bernie Sanders of the world. And hadn't seen too many Biden signs out there, but, it is what it is. But yeah, this is not Trump country in the neighborhood that I'm in. And it would be a mischaracterization of my neighbors, whom I dearly love, to say that those people are all just wild, outlandish, cultural, upsetting type people who are out there, unpatriotic. I mean, they're doing big things. They're doing great things, and they should be recognized as such.
Yeah. Next week, cultural Marxism. Tackling that.
Yeah, we'll throw in a couple of light topics as well. Hopefully the AC I won't be here, so it doesn't matter if the AC is fixed. I'll be somewhere where the AC is working, and we can go.
At some point, we got to get to sports. At some point. I mean, basketball.
What's in the tagline of the show? We're supposed to be talking about sports.
That's right. That's what you and I talk about 90% of the time. Is why Steph Curry is much better than anybody else out there at this point.
Well, Steph is going to come back and have to assert himself because he took a season off, and these cats they didn't wait around for him, man. Trae Young, he came to form. We got Ja Morant, who said, "I ain't afraid of Steph Curry. I dunk on him."
I think that it was it's crazy that in the season that Steph Curry decides to take off, the NBA has to cancel its season. There's got to be a conspiracy theory in there somewhere, uh, working out for the Golden State Warriors because they actually
Oh yeah,
should have a chance to come back and do
we're not
something
even going
great.
to count this championship. Whoever wins it, they'll be like, nah, Golden State didn't plan it that year. They just took the season
But
off.
hey, it's not like it's gonna be it's LeBron's to lose, right? I mean, that's the Lakers coming into this thing is it's LeBron's to lose, right?
I mean, I saw some of the workouts. I've been watching some of the workouts, the NBA and the bubble.
That's
I
right.
mean, there's this guy named Kawhi Leonard. They better have
Kawhi.
somebody else other than LeBron. And AD is a beast. But
I
I'm
don't
just
know how
going to
I
tell you
feel
that
about
boy Kawhi, he's
I
no
don't,
joke.
yeah. I'm still figuring him out. But that's a
Karen
whole other
says
topic.
you need a Cardinals hat.
No. Karen, I'm sure you're a very nice person. And I'm sure you're a very nice person.
You're
But
70 miles from St. Louis. What's the deal?
I live in Cardinal country and have taken a beating. I've even been heckled from the pulpit, even though I'm not even wearing the Cubs hat. Hey, but we got our day in 2016, so I always go back. I actually got to watch the Cubs win the World Series. I didn't think that was going to happen. So,
All right,
anyways,
bro. Love you, man. I'm
yeah, you
listening
take
to
care.
fan on my computer run here, and I'm
And he's
jealous
probably
of the
telling
fan on my computer. I'm trying to get closer to it.
that's right. That's right.
Can you blow this thing on me? Oh,
That's
goodness gracious.
good.
All right.
Good.
Well, from a sweaty Nashville, Tennessee, and what looks like comfortable Illinois, Litchfield, Illinois, give us our final comments and our focus. How do we move forward?
Again, it goes back to the church replacing this Marxist worldview with the Christian worldview. We have a great and glorious opportunity and future. Christ is going to come back one day and make all things new. He's going to reconcile the nations. He's going to reconcile this world, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a hope that is real and good and expands beyond our lifespan. And it's a hope that's lasted from the time that God said, "Let there be light," to the time He comes back. And so, the church has a glorious message and a hope that needs to go out to our neighbors, and it needs to begin with our children. We need to really have a robust ministry towards our children because that's who they're going after. Our 10 to 20-year-olds, they're going to hit them really hard. And we can talk about this next week, but Google and Facebook and those guys have got it in for our kids. And I can explain why next week.
Amen. Even up into the wire, because it was about a 10-second delay, we had some people who were making comments about things that especially when we brought up Trump. There's some people who want to jump in on that and then talk about holding President Trump accountable. And I have some things that I want to say about that as well. So you'll have to tune in later and see this.
Yep.
So let's deal with some of that in the context of cultural Marxism, because on the other side of that, Marx in the classic communism is replacing and referring to capitalism.
Yep.
You could use as a linchpin on the other side of this overt capitalism that we've gotten ourselves into, which again, both of those ideologies can push us very far away from the gospel. And we need to be aware of the fact that if we're going to beat up cultural Marxism and liberalism and its encroachment into our society and the fabric of our culture, we need to also be aware of the fact how capitalism can lead us into a place where we're like the rich young ruler and we go away very depressed.
Right.
We have our possessions, but we don't have Christ. And so let's talk about that. There's some comments that you guys can still make, seed some things in our minds for next week, but we're going to strike the bell for cultural Marxism, the church, and how we move forward. And yeah.
All right, man.
That's it.